Chapter 1. The Prophecy of Doom. In the shadowed halls of the palace of Argos, the aged king Acrisius walked with a troubled heart. The marble floors, once a stage for joyous celebration, echoed only the hollow tap of his sandals and the whispered fears that haunted him. A prophecy, cruel and immutable, had been spoken by the oracle of Delphi. Your own grandson shall be the cause of your death. No prayer to Zeus, no sacrifice at the altar of Apollo had silenced the words that hung over his head like a sword waiting to fall. Acrisius had one daughter, Danae, fair and radiant, her beauty the talk of all Argolis. And though she was yet untouched by any man, the prophecy spoke clear. It was her womb that would bring forth his doom. Driven by fear, not cruelty, Acrisius summoned his guards to seal Danae in a chamber of bronze. Deep beneath the palace, hidden from the light of day, a tower was forged, a cell no lover could breach, no whisper of prophecy could escape. Yet even bronze cannot bar the will of the gods. One night, as Danae lay weeping beneath a small lattice of stars above her chamber, a warm breeze stirred the air. Golden light filtered through the slits in the ceiling, shimmering like sun-kissed mist. And from that radiance, Zeus himself descended, not in the form of man, but as a shower of divine gold, silent, radiant, and eternal. When morning came, Danae awoke knowing something had changed within her. Life stirred in her womb, and the child of Zeus grew day by day in secret. 9 moons passed, and in the darkness of her chamber, Danae bore a son, his eyes bright with celestial fire, his name whispered with both hope and dread, Perseus. Chapter 2. Cast into the Sea. The cries of a newborn echoed within the bronze chamber, a defiance to fate, to kings, to the gods themselves. Danae cradled her infant son, her heart torn between joy and dread. She knew, as surely as the stars watched overhead, that the secret could not be hidden forever. And indeed, the truth soon reached King Acrisius. Rage overtook him, not the anger of a man betrayed, but the fear of one doomed. He could not bear to spill the blood of his own daughter, nor risk divine retribution by harming the son of Zeus. Instead, he chose exile by sea. A great wooden chest was constructed, nailed shut and sealed with tar. Within, Danae and the infant Perseus were placed, wrapped in cloth and tears. Acrisius stood on the rocky shore, his face as hard as the cliffs behind him, watching as the chest was cast into the surging waves. The sea took them, its gray mouth swallowing mother and son. Danae whispered prayers to the gods, to Athena, to Poseidon, and to Zeus himself. Salt wind lashed her face as the chest bobbed and dipped among the churning tides. But the sea, though cold and merciless, held its breath for them. For days they drifted, through storm and stillness, past whales and sea serpents, over coral palaces unseen by mortal eyes, until, at last, the chest washed ashore on the island of Seriphos. There, a humble fisherman named Dictys discovered them, his net drawn not with fish, but with fate. He pried the lid open and beheld a mother, gaunt and wild-eyed, and a babe whose gaze burned with the light of Olympus. Dictys brought them to his home and gave them shelter. And in the years that followed, Perseus grew tall and strong, unaware of the destiny that awaited him. Chapter 3. The Tyrant King's Desire. Years passed on the island of Seriphos, and Perseus grew into a youth of striking presence. Dark curls like ocean waves, eyes like polished bronze, and strength carved from the stones of the island. Danae,
though scarred by her past, found a quiet peace in the modest home of Dictys. Yet fate, as ever, stirred restlessly beneath the calm. Seriphos was ruled by Polydectes, brother to Dictys, a king cunning as a serpent and greedy for beauty. When word reached him of the golden-haired Danae, Polydectes made his intentions clear. He would have her, not for love, but possession. At first, he courted her with feasts and flattery. When she remained distant, his demeanor soured. He knew Perseus, now nearly a man, stood between him and his desire. Polydectes turned to deceit. He announced a grand feast in his palace to celebrate his supposed betrothal to another. Each guest, he declared, must bring a horse as a gift, a custom among nobles. Perseus, poor and with no steed to offer, stood ashamed. Mocked and pressured, he burst out, "Name any gift, and I shall bring it to you, even the head of Medusa herself." The court fell silent. Polydectes, lips curling like a jackal, accepted the boast. "Very well, brave son of Zeus," he said, eyes glittering with malice. "Bring me the head of the Gorgon, if your courage matches your words." And so the trap was sprung. Polydectes hoped the boy would die in the attempt, but the gods, ever watchful, saw in Perseus a spark of destiny. That very night, in a dream half real, Athena appeared, tall and silver-clad, her eyes fierce as a hawk's. She said, "You have been chosen, but not alone shall you walk the path. You must seek the guidance of the Graeae and the gifts of the gods." Then she vanished, leaving only the clang of an owl's wings in the darkness. Thus began the hero's quest, not for glory, but to protect his mother, and unknowingly to carve his name into legend. Chapter 4: The Gorgon's Curse. The morning after his fateful vow, Perseus left the shores of Seriphos. The island faded into mist behind him, and in its place rose the vast uncertainty of a world ruled by gods and monsters. He carried no sword, no armor, only the will to fulfill his word and protect his mother from the claws of a tyrant. He wandered through barren plains and shadowed forests, seeking the path to the Graeae, the Grey Sisters. These ancient beings, older than the Olympians themselves, held the secret to finding Medusa, the last of the mortal Gorgons. But they were elusive, hidden in the veil between the living world and the realms of shadow. As Perseus walked, the world shifted. Storm clouds gathered over the earth like a warning. Thunder rumbled, not of rain, but of divine judgment. And then from the sky descended Hermes, the swift-footed messenger of the gods. His winged sandals barely touched the ground as he landed before the mortal hero. "You have stirred Olympus with your boldness," Hermes said with a smirk, "but fortune, or perhaps fate, favors you. Take these." He handed Perseus two gifts, a pair of winged sandals and a curved sword of celestial bronze, light as air, yet sharp enough to cleave steel. "And more shall come," he added. "But first, find the Graeae." Before Perseus could speak, Hermes vanished into mist. Guided by divine instinct, the youth climbed into the mountains beyond the edges of the known world, where the winds howled like wolves. There, in a cave carved from obsidian, he found them. The Graeae, 3 crones with skin as gray as ash and hair like rotting seaweed, huddled around a single eye which they passed among them. They smelled of dust and decay, of time forgotten. They knew he had come before he stepped inside. "Son of Zeus, you seek the monster, but do you seek death as well?" Perseus, though shaken, stood firm. "Tell me where Medusa hides." The sisters cackled, and one held the eye to her socket. "Why should we tell you, child of thunder?" Quick as lightning, Perseus seized the eye from their bony hands. "You will tell me," he said, "or you shall never see again." Their shrieks echoed into the night. At last they relented. whispering the secrets of Medusa's lair, far to the west, beyond the river Oceanus, where the cursed dwell in stone. With the knowledge secured, Perseus returned the eye, and the crones vanished into the rock. The path now lay open. But with it came the weight of dread. For Medusa was no mere monster. She had once been a maiden of surpassing beauty, a priestess of Athena. Violated by Poseidon in the sacred temple, she was cursed, not by her assailant, but by the goddess herself. Her golden hair turned to serpents, her gaze a death sentence. And so Medusa waited, in exile, turned cruel and broken, less a beast than a victim made monstrous.
Chapter 5. The Gifts of the Gods. Perseus, armed with the Graeae's knowledge and the divine blade of Hermes, continued westward, where the air grew colder and the skies darker. The lands he passed through were not marked on any map. Time itself seemed to slow, and the stars wheeled differently above him, as if he had stepped into a realm between gods and men. He crossed deserts where shadows whispered his name, and over black mountains where no birds flew. At last, as he reached the edge of the world, where earth met the river Oceanus and the sea cascaded into mist, he came upon a grove unlike any he had seen. This was the sacred garden of the Hesperides, daughters of the evening star. Here bloomed golden apples of immortality, tended by maidens whose laughter could turn madness sweet. But Perseus did not come for fruit. He sought the final tools to defeat Medusa. A hush fell over the garden as he approached, and from its heart stepped a figure clad in gleaming bronze, Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. Her helm caught the twilight, and her gray eyes pierced into him like spears. She said, without preamble, "You know whom you face. You understand that to gaze upon Medusa is to die. You must strike without looking." Perseus nodded. "Then help me see without seeing." Athena raised her hand, and into it appeared a shining bronze shield, polished to mirror perfection. "Look into this, and her gaze shall not reach you." As he took the shield, another voice called out, this one softer, swifter, a voice carried by wind. Hermes returned, hovering just above the ground, offering another gift, a magic satchel woven from the night sky itself. "You will need this to carry her head, lest its power kill those around you." But there remained one final gift, perhaps the most mysterious of all. From the shadows emerged a tall, silent being, Hades, lord of the underworld. No words were spoken. He placed upon Perseus's head a helm wrought from obsidian and ghostlight. "This will render you invisible," Athena explained. "Use it wisely, for it was not made for mercy." Now armed with the 4 divine tools, the sword of Hermes, the mirror shield of Athena, the satchel of starlight, and the helm of Hades, Perseus stood no longer as a mere mortal. He was a chosen of Olympus. The Hesperides sang as he departed, a song of mourning and triumph. Their voices echoed into endless dusk as Perseus soared westward on winged sandals, his shadow merging with the winds of fate. Chapter 6. Across the ocean of night. The edge of the world was not a place, but a threshold, where sea became mist and sky became memory. Here, beyond the Hesperides, Perseus stood upon a wind-scoured cliff, staring into a vast chasm of black ocean. The stars above twisted strangely, constellations foreign even to the learned seers of Olympus. Beneath his winged sandals, the rock crumbled, daring him to take flight, and so he did. The sandals of Hermes bore him over the churning waves of the ocean of night, a boundless ancient sea said to encircle all lands.
Here, the laws of mortal navigation did not apply. The sky rotated on a different axis, and no sun ever rose. The air smelled of salt, ash, and something older. Storms greeted him like beasts, lightning clawed at the sky, waves rose like titans. But Perseus, his gaze fixed on the horizon, and his heart armored with divine gifts, pressed onward. At times he saw things moving in the deep, leviathans vast enough to swallow islands whole. Once a pale, translucent figure drifted up from the depths, a drowned king still clutching a shattered scepter, his eyes glowing faintly green. He made no sound, only stared at Perseus until the winds blew him back into the abyss. For 3 days and nights Perseus did not sleep. He relied on ambrosia given by Hermes, light in a vial, taken drop by drop. It filled his veins with fire and banished exhaustion, but it also drew him closer to the realm of gods than that of men. Then, on the 4th day, the storm ceased. The sea grew unnaturally still. Ahead, through a break in the mist, Perseus saw what few mortals ever beheld, the Isle of the Gorgons. It rose like a fang from the sea, jagged cliffs black as obsidian, with dead trees clinging to the slopes like bones. No birds flew here, no wind sang, only silence reigned, heavy and eternal. He landed softly, the helm of Hades already upon his head. He vanished from the sight of the world, even his own shadow lost. Invisibility was no comfort here. It felt more like being forgotten. The ground itself resisted his footsteps. Vines writhed when touched. Statues littered the path. Warriors, beasts, even gods, frozen mid-scream, stone eyes wide with fear. Medusa's legacy. Perseus gripped the mirror shield tighter. The hunt had begun. Chapter 7. Into the lair of Medusa. Beyond the petrified path, where stone warriors lay shattered like forgotten dreams, Perseus stepped through the veil of nightmare. A foul wind drifted from the mouth of a cavern, Medusa's lair, a wound torn into the belly of the black cliff. Inside, there was no light, only the cloying scent of decay and the oppressive weight of ancient curses. The helm of Hades still cloaked him in divine shadow, but even invisibility offered no true shield from what dwelt here. Perseus advanced slowly, using the polished shield of Athena as both torch and guide. It reflected not the world as it was, but the world as it must be seen, backward, indirect, safe. In its gleaming surface, shadows writhed, and the cave seemed alive. The very walls pulsed with veins of sickly green light. Then he heard it, a sound like scales dragging across bone, a whisper like the sigh of a dying god, and then a voice. "I smell life, Medusa." She did not slither like a serpent, she drifted, her form more ghost than flesh, a once beautiful priestess now twisted by Athena's wrath. Her body, part woman, part serpent, was crowned with a nest of living snakes, each hissing and rearing with venomous hunger. Her face remained hidden in darkness, for to see it was death. Perseus did not breathe. Each footstep was measured, the sword of Hephaestus gripped tightly in one hand, the shield in the other. He watched her only through reflection, moving sideways, carefully avoiding the direct line of sight. "They came before you," Medusa whispered, a mournful rasp. "Their bones feed my children now." Suddenly she turned sharply. Perseus froze. One wrong move, one misstep, stone. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, louder than any battle drum. Through the mirrored shield, he saw her glide closer, sniffing the air like a predator. The snakes writhed, tasting fear. "But you, I cannot see you. Are you a ghost or a coward hiding in God's shadows?" Still silent, Perseus stepped behind a column of bone-pale rock, inching nearer. The moment was near. Medusa turned her back, and with a warrior's cry, Perseus leapt. The sword swung, not wild, but guided by fate. Steel sang, the cave howled, and Medusa's head fell. Her body convulsed, then collapsed in silence. The snake screamed, one final shrill chorus before falling limp. Her blood pooled, dark and hissing, melting the rock beneath. Perseus stood over the body, shaking, breath ragged. The head of Medusa, eyes still glowing faintly, lay in his shield. Even dead, its gaze held the power to petrify. He wrapped it quickly in the special satchel Hermes had given him, woven from moonlight and shadow, impervious to the curse. He had done the impossible, but the world would not let him leave unchallenged. The lair began to tremble, the mountain groaned. From the depths of the isle, something else awakened.
Chapter 8. Blood of the Gorgon. The moment Medusa's head was sealed within the enchanted satchel, the world itself seemed to shudder. The cavern echoed with a groan, not of stone, but of something deeper, the groan of a violated curse. Ancient magics, woven into the very veins of the earth, began to unravel. Perseus stood in the heart of the lair, the head of Medusa in his hands. Her blood spilled from the neck like molten ink, hissing as it touched the stone. But this was no ordinary blood. Where it pooled, it birthed monsters. From one black puddle rose a winged horse, pure and white, Pegasus, the child of Medusa and Poseidon, born of tragedy and blood. It neighed wildly, eyes blazing with divine fire, wings flaring wide as moonlight shimmered off its celestial mane. From another bloodstain emerged a shadowy figure with a golden blade, Chrysoron, warrior son of Medusa, born not as a child but fully armored, roaring with rage and sorrow. Perseus stumbled back, awestruck. "I am no enemy," he whispered, "only fate's hand." Pegasus flapped its wings, rising into the air. It circled above Perseus, then dipped its head gently, as if recognizing its deliverer. The stallion had no master, yet something within it stirred toward this mortal. It would not forget the moment of its birth. But Chrysoron did not share that peace. "You slew my mother," the golden warrior growled, eyes burning with fury. "You wear the gifts of gods, yet play their butcher." He raised his blade, golden as the sun, and attacked. Perseus, drained and bloodied, had no desire to fight. He parried as best he could, using the shield as a mirror and barrier. Chrysoron fought like a god, not a man, each strike heavy as fate. The cavern trembled with their battle. But then, the blood of Medusa, still spreading, began to pulse. From it arose more abominations. Serpent beasts, half-formed gorgons, creatures of shadow and screech. The lair had become a crucible of chaos. Chrysoron turned, seeing the monsters. He roared not in rage, but in grief. "Her death has unchained what she held back." He turned back to Perseus, sword lowered. The fight was over, not with one another, but against the wrath her death had unleashed. Together they fought back the horrors. Perseus slashed with the blade of Hephaestus, while Chrysoron cleaved through demons with god-born strength. Pegasus soared above them, kicking and flying in bursts of divine wind. At last, the cave calmed. The blood stopped boiling. The air, once rank with death, grew cold and silent. Chrysoron dropped his sword. "Leave this cursed place," he said. "You've done what no mortal dared." And then, without another word, the golden warrior stepped into the shadows, vanishing into the depths of the earth. Perseus turned to Pegasus. The winged steed knelt, offering its back. Grateful, exhausted, and now more myth than man, Perseus mounted Pegasus, and together they flew from the cursed island of the Gorgons, back toward destiny. Chapter 9. Return to Seriphos.
The winds carried Pegasus high above the sea, swift as thought and smooth as starlight. Upon his back, Perseus rode with the solemn air of a man forever changed. The head of Medusa, wrapped tightly within Athena's satchel, pulsed with unseen energy, the remnants of a god-slaying power. Beneath them, the world sprawled in tranquil beauty. Cerulean seas, distant islands, and scattered storms whispering across the waves. But Perseus's thoughts were dark, not of the sky, but of home, of Seriphos, of his mother, Danae. How long had it been since he left? Months? A year? Time moved strangely for heroes. At last, the coast of Seriphos came into view. It was a small island, gentle in appearance, but burdened by cruelty. He remembered Polydectes, the tyrant king who had sought Danae for his own pleasure and mocked Perseus into an impossible quest. The people of Seriphos gathered as the strange shadow passed over them, a winged horse with a shining warrior upon its back. Many fell to their knees in awe, others fled indoors in fear. No one recognized the youth who had once left with a promise and no hope. Perseus dismounted at the palace gates. "Open the doors," he commanded. The guards stepped back, unsure of what they saw, but before they could raise a sword or a voice, the great doors burst open from within. There stood Polydectes, draped in finery, his sneer unchanged. "So the boy returns," he laughed. "Have you brought me the Gorgon's head, or shall I send your mother to the temple for marriage?" The hall was crowded. Nobles, sycophants, cruel men who had backed the king in tormenting Danae. Perseus stepped forward. His voice, calm but thunderous, echoed. "I have done what you demanded. I have slain the Gorgon." The hall erupted in laughter and mockery, but Perseus did not flinch. "You dared challenge the will of the gods. Now look upon the price of your hubris." He pulled forth the head of Medusa, eyes still open, still glowing faintly with her curse. The mockery ceased. A moment of silence, then stone. Polydectes and all those gathered turned to marble. Their faces, frozen in expressions of scorn or horror, would remain as eternal warnings to tyrants and cowards. Only the innocent were spared. The poor, the abused, those who had sheltered Danae in secret, watched as Perseus turned away, tucking the Gorgon's head back into its resting place. In the palace garden, Danae appeared. She had aged, but her spirit remained strong. The moment she saw Perseus, her eyes filled with tears. "You came home," she whispered. "I kept my promise." They embraced, mother and son, beneath the blooming olive trees. Pegasus stood nearby, feathers shimmering like falling stars. That night the island feasted not in glory, but in freedom. A new age had come to Seriphos. But for Perseus it was not the end. The gods had granted him tools not to keep, but to return. And so, with his duty to Danae fulfilled, Perseus turned his eyes once more to the sky. Pegasus neighed softly, as if sensing the call of Olympus. Chapter 10. The Return of the Gifts. The island of Seriphos was peaceful now, but Perseus knew his work was not yet finished. The weapons and relics bestowed by the gods were not his to keep. Their power was sacred, meant for purpose, not possession. With a final glance at his mother, safe and content at last, he mounted Pegasus once more and rose into the heavens. The wind tugged at his cloak as he soared toward Athena's temple, a gleaming fortress perched on a mountain crest. Marble columns flanked the gate, and at their heart stood the goddess herself, waiting. She was clad in shining bronze, her gray eyes eternal and unreadable. When Perseus dismounted and knelt before her, he held out the satchel reverently. "Great Athena, your task is fulfilled. I return to you the head of Medusa." Athena accepted the satchel with silent grace. Then, with divine calm, she turned and embedded the head upon her shield, the mighty Aegis. From that day on, Medusa's gaze would protect Olympus, forever turning evil to stone. You have done well, son of Danae. Rise now, for the gods are pleased. She raised her hand, and with a shimmer of silver, the helm of Hades appeared in Perseus's grip. Now return what was borrowed, for power unused is power uncorrupted. So Perseus journeyed on, first to the underworld, where the river Styx churned amain. Hades. Few mortals travel the rivers before death. From there, Perseus flew to Hermes, messenger of the gods. With a nod, he surrendered the winged sandals, then the curved sword he had wielded against Medusa. Swift and deadly, it had become part of the mantle he wore. Last came the nymphs of the north, guardians of the gifts of immortality. In each place, Perseus was received not as a hero demanding honor, but as a servant who had completed his Solian Messiah. The gods, often cruel or disdainful, showed him respect for this one act of humility. By the end of his journey, Perseus bore no divine gifts, no trophies of conquest, only his name and his story. And that? Chapter 11. The Founding of Mycenae. The skies had darkened and cleared, storms passed, and battles faded into legend. But Perseus, though a hero of the gods, still belonged to the world of men. No longer wielding divine artifacts, he returned to Argos, the land of his birthright, yet not to rule it, for fate had other plans. When King Acrisius, the man who had cast Diane and her infant son into the sea, heard of Perseus's return, fear gripped his heart. He remembered the prophecy. His grandson would bring about his end. Despite his age and waning strength, Acrisius fled the city, hoping to outrun fate itself. But fate, once whispered by the oracle of Delphi, does not forget. Perseus sought no vengeance. He entered Argos not as a conqueror, but as a son reclaiming a broken legacy. Yet the throne of Argos no longer called to him. The people rejoiced in his return, but he saw no future in a kingdom cursed by old wounds and prophecy. Let me not take what was once denied by fear. Let Argos heal without the weight of my shadow, he said. Instead, Perseus journeyed north, following the mountain passes and starlit plains until he came upon a wide and fertile land, unclaimed, untouched, a land that seemed to whisper to him in dreams. There, at the foot of a hill wrapped in olive groves and wildflowers, he planted a bronze sword into the earth, declaring, "Here shall rise a city of honor, built not on conquest, but on courage." And so was born Mycenae, destined to become one of the greatest cities of ancient Greece. Stone by stone, Perseus led its rise. He welcomed craftsmen, farmers, and warriors from every corner of Hellas. Walls of Cyclopean stone were erected, so massive and precise that men believed giants had shaped them. A palace rose at the center, crowned with golden lions and frescoes of heroes. In the heart of the city, Perseus built a temple, not for himself, but for Athena, protector of wisdom and war. He would not rule as a tyrant, but as a king guided by divine justice. Years passed, and Diane, now free and honored, watched her son's city flourish. Andromeda, radiant and strong, became queen beside him, beloved by the people. Their children played beneath olive trees, never knowing the sea's cruelty or the wrath of gods. But still, the prophecy lingered. One spring, at the grand games of Larissa, Perseus entered a discus competition. Unaware that Acrisius, his grandfather, was among the spectators, disguised and aged, he cast the discus with strength unmatched. The wind shifted. The discus veered. A cry broke through the crowd. When Perseus ran to the fallen man, he saw Acrisius's lifeless form, struck down not by intent, but by fate. the prophecy had come true. Perseus fell to his knees, grief and awe tearing at his heart. He had tried to escape the shadow of destiny, but like all mortals, he had only played his part in its design.
Chapter 12. The Rise of Mycenae. The death of King Acrisius weighed heavily on Perseus's heart, not as a victory over fate, but as a cruel fulfillment of a destiny he had tried to escape. Though the people of Larissa absolved him, seeing clearly the accident, he mourned deeply. Yet in the wake of sorrow, a new era dawned. Perseus returned to Mycenae, where the golden sun warmed the stones of a city growing fast in strength and wonder. He walked among his people, not as a distant ruler, but as a builder, a protector, a man. He spoke often of humility, of the burden of power, and of the god's will. His past, entwined with divine encounters and monstrous foes, gave him wisdom few possessed. And it was this wisdom that guided Mycenae's rise, not just as a city of wealth or walls, but as a symbol of order amid chaos. A kingdom rooted in justice. In the central forum, under a bronze statue of Athena, Perseus presided over disputes. Farmers, soldiers, and artisans brought their grievances before him. His rulings were fair, guided by law and mercy. And soon, tales of the just king of Mycenae spread across Achaea. "Let the throne be not a weapon, but a balance," he once said. Trade flourished. Merchants from Crete, Egypt, and Anatolia came bearing spices, bronze, and wisdom. The harbor thrived with sails, and markets buzzed with voices in many tongues. The hero's legacy. Even as peace reigned, Perseus trained the next generation. Young warriors learned the way of the sword, the shield, and, more importantly, valor. His son Electryon, bold and golden-haired, showed great promise. His daughters were taught to read, to speak with grace and wisdom, and to know their place not just in palace halls, but in shaping the fate of the kingdom. Perseus also established a temple to Zeus, grand in its pillars and thunder-inscribed friezes. But he never forgot the gifts once lent to him by the gods, the helm, the sandals, the blade. He enshrined their likenesses in the temple, not for worship, but to remind his people that power comes with cost. Peace among kings. One of Perseus's most lasting accomplishments came not from sword or shield, but from diplomacy. He journeyed to Tiryns, Corinth, and Sparta, forging alliances through oaths, marriages, and mutual respect. With each treaty, war's shadow withdrew a little further. His name, once whispered in fear by kings, was now spoken with admiration. He became not just the slayer of Medusa, but a unifier of lands. "A true hero," said the Spartan king, "is not one who conquers, but one who endures." Nightfall and reflection. In the quiet hours of night, Perseus often stood on the balcony of his palace, looking out at the torches dotting the hills, the stars above echoing the dreams of mortals below. He thought of his youth, the sound of waves crashing against the island of Seriphus, of the Gorgon's gaze, and of Andromeda, now by his side still, unwavering and strong. He had become more than the prophecy that birthed him, more than the weapon forged by fate. He was a man, a king, and a father. And Mycenae, his greatest creation, was no longer just a city. It was a living legend, pulsing with hope, justice, and the memory of monsters slain and trials overcome. Chapter 13. The Bloodline of Heroes. The years passed, and Perseus's kingdom stood as a beacon in the Aegean world. Mycenae was not merely a fortress of stone, but a realm of memory and prophecy, built upon the shoulders of gods, monsters, and men.
But while the past cast a long shadow, Perseus's gaze turned forward, to the lineage he would leave behind. For the fate of heroes, it is said, never ends with the slaying of monsters. Their true legacy lies in their children and the choices they make when the sword has been sheathed. The sons of Perseus. Perseus and Andromeda bore many sons: Electryon, Alcaeus, Mestor, Sthenelus, and Helios, each bearing strength and wisdom in varying measure. Yet it was Electryon, noble of bearing and brave of heart, who would one day wear his father's crown. Perseus trained his sons not only in warcraft, but in diplomacy, philosophy, and divine law. He reminded them that kingship was no reward, it was a burden to be earned daily. He often told them, "The weight of a crown is not in gold, but in the lives it shelters." Each son took to his own path. Some sought adventure, others stayed to learn statecraft. Mestor journeyed across the seas to foreign lands, seeking to understand distant peoples. Sthenelus studied the arts and became a patron of temples and poets. Yet in all them burned the same fire that once compelled their father to face the Gorgon. The daughter of destiny. Among their children, one would shape the fate of gods and men. Electryon fathered a daughter, Alcmene, a woman of radiant beauty and unshakable spirit. From her blood would come a hero unmatched, one whose strength would echo beyond Olympus itself. Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules. Though still an infant in this time, Alcmene's birth was heralded by omens, flaming stars, sacred doves circling the temple, and a whisper among seers. From the blood of Medusa's slayer shall rise one who challenges Olympus itself. Perseus looked upon her and knew the cycle would continue, not with fear, but with awe. The founding of dynasties. Perseus's sons spread across the Greek world, founding cities, dynasties, and lineages that would populate the myths of generations. Helios ruled over Sparta's allies, Alcaeus governed the lands of Tyrans, and Mestor's blood would mingle with that of Poseidon's line through distant unions. Wherever their feet touched soil, legends bloomed. And through it all, Perseus remained the common ancestor, the living bridge between mortals and gods. The hero's philosophy. In his later years, Perseus no longer lifted a sword, but he wielded wisdom. He taught that true heroism was not the slaying of monsters, but the protection of peace, not glory in battle, but humility in service. He wrote letters to other kings, old foes, and new allies, urging them to think beyond their borders. He invited scholars, musicians, and priests to Mycenae, making it a hub of culture as well as strength. "Let Mycenae be remembered not for its wars, but for its wisdom," he declared in his final public address before the assembly. A time of calm. The gods were silent in these years, no thunderbolts, no winged messengers. But their silence was not absence, it was approval. Mount Olympus watched as a mortal kingdom did what many divine ones could not: grow, thrive, and prepare its next generation without succumbing to pride or ruin. The house of Perseus would become the seedbed of myths, bearing fruit in the age of Heracles, the Trojan War, and even the rise of Rome itself. But here, in this chapter, was the moment of peace before the next storm, the calm earned by one hero's journey, completed. Chapter 14. The Twilight of the Hero. The sun no longer blazed at its zenith in Perseus's life. It now cast golden rays upon the western hills, soft and full of memory. Time, the one adversary no sword could strike, came slowly but surely for the slayer of Medusa. Yet his twilight years were not spent in regret or decline, but in reflection, mentorship, and graceful withdrawal from the world he had helped shape. A hero grows old. Perseus, now gray at the temples, walked often along the marble colonnades of Mycenae's palace. His limbs, once forged in battle, grew heavy. His eyesight, once sharp enough to detect a Gorgon in shadow, now blurred with age. And yet there remained a fire in his voice, a precision in his words that kings and commoners alike honored. He no longer wielded a blade, but his wisdom became a weapon greater than any sword. Diplomats came seeking advice, warriors asked for his blessing, and poets composed verses in his name. His children stood strong beside him. Electryon ruled with honor. Alcaeus developed a fortress in Tiryns, and Andromeda, ever his anchor, remained his companion in thought and soul, aging with the same grace he did. The gods remember. One evening, as the sun bled into the sea, Perseus dreamed. In his vision stood Athena, her spear at rest, eyes filled with quiet pride. "Perseus," she said, "you were not born of Olympus, but Olympus remembers you." He awoke and knew that time was short. The gods, so long silent, had stirred again, not to summon, but to receive. And so Perseus set his affairs in order. He dictated final letters to his sons. He shared private teachings with Alcmene. He walked with Andromeda to the high cliffs overlooking the Aegean and recited the tale of their escape from Cetus one last time. "I have lived the life of a tale told by stars," he whispered, "and you, my love, were the sky that gave it meaning." A journey without return. In the dead of night, as if summoned by fate itself, Perseus left his palace alone. He wore no armor, bore no weapon. Dressed in a white robe, he walked toward the temple of Zeus on the mountain ridge above Mycenae. There he prayed, not for glory, not for remembrance, but for peace. It is said that a golden eagle descended from the clouds and circled 3 times above the temple, then vanished into the stars. The priests who found the temple the next morning discovered only Perseus's cloak folded neatly atop the altar, his body gone, taken by the gods. Thus did Perseus pass, not into the underworld, but into myth. Perseus among the stars. Athena placed him among the constellations, Perseus the hero, forever locked in battle against the Gorgon, guarding Andromeda in the heavens. Travelers and seafarers looked up and saw his star-etched form guiding them through night and storm. No mortal tomb was ever found, no pyre was lit, for heroes of his kind are not buried, they are remembered. And so his tale became the seed of legends. Children chanted his name beside hearths, sculptors carved his likeness into stone, and his descendants, Heracles foremost among them, carried forth his courage. Chapter 15. The legacy begins. With Perseus gone, a silence settled upon the kingdom of Mycenae, a silence not of despair, but of reverence. The people mourned, yet they also celebrated, for their hero had not died like other men. He had transcended mortality and joined the heavens. But the world did not stop. Kings still ruled, battles were still fought, and the blood of Perseus flowed on through those who would shape the future of Hellas and beyond. Electryon ascends. The throne of Mycenae passed to Electryon, firstborn of Perseus and Andromeda. Though his father had often spoken through strength, Electryon ruled with stability and foresight. He expanded the city's walls, commissioned temples in honor of both Zeus and Athena, and instituted schools where children would be taught not only of war, but of justice and memory. He wore his father's cloak during ceremonies, but never dared don the helm of Hades or lift the sickle of Hermes. These were relics, not tools. He believed the true legacy was not in weapons, but in wisdom passed down. And Electryon had a daughter, Alcmene. Her smile was her grandmother's, her courage was her grandfather's, and destiny, once again, stirred. Prophecies reborn. Oracles from Delphi whispered of a future son born from Alcmene's line, one who would wield a lion's strength and a mortal's heart. They spoke of Heracles long before he was born as the one who would exceed even Perseus in labor and glory. Zeus himself watched from Olympus, remembering Danae, remembering Perseus, and already planning the union that would bring forth the next great champion of the Greeks. Thus, from Perseus's line came a second golden age of heroes. Foundations of great cities. Beyond Mycenae, the legacy of Perseus spread like roots from a great tree. His son Mestor traveled east and married into Phoenician royalty, weaving Greek valor into foreign courts. Sthenelus took Argos, and his descendants ruled there for generations. Tales of Perseus and Medusa were painted on urns and mosaics across the Aegean. Statues of the winged Pegasus adorned city squares. Poets competed in festivals to recite the epic of the Gorgon slayer, and children reenacted the moment the blade fell in dramatized rites each spring. Myth became culture. Story became statecraft. Chapter 16. The Birth of Heracles. Though Perseus had long ascended to the stars, his blood still pulsed through the veins of mortals destined for greatness. Now, that divine thread prepared to weave the tale of the greatest hero the world would ever know, Heracles, son of Zeus, born from the house of Perseus. Zeus's desire. From atop Olympus, Zeus looked down upon Alcmene, the granddaughter of Perseus. She was as noble in spirit as she was radiant in form. The king of gods, ever moved by beauty and destiny, resolved that her child would surpass even Perseus. But Alcmene was already wed to Amphitryon, a prince of Tiryns, noble and proud. Yet Zeus, with his immortal cunning, disguised himself as Amphitryon returning from war in the dead of night. In their bedchamber, under a moonlit sky, Alcmene welcomed the god unknowing. And so it was that Heracles was conceived, half god, half mortal. Hera's wrath. When Hera, queen of Olympus, learned of her husband's latest betrayal, her fury turned not only upon Zeus, but upon the child growing in Alcmene's womb. She summoned witches of childbirth, the Moirai and Eileithyia, to delay Alcmene's labor, hoping to prevent the boy's birth. Yet Galanthis, a clever handmaiden, tricked the witches by crying out, "The baby is born!" Startled, they lost their concentration, and Heracles entered the world, a lion among lambs. Hera's wrath only grew. The serpent test. When Heracles lay in his cradle, Hera sent 2 serpents to slither into the nursery, their fangs ready to strike. But the infant hero did not cry. He reached out one chubby hand to each serpent's throat and crushed them as if they were twigs. Alcmene and Amphitryon rushed in to find their child giggling amidst the slain beasts, the light of the gods flickering in his eyes. The world began to whisper, "A new hero is born." The training of a demigod. From the moment he could walk, Heracles was taught the arts of war, wisdom, and endurance. Autolycus taught him wrestling. Castor of Sparta trained him in tactics. Linus, the musician, guided his hands upon the lyre, until Heracles, enraged by correction, struck him dead with the instrument. Even as a child, strength and rage warred within him. The people of Tiryns and Mycenae watched him grow, murmuring that this boy bore the blood of kings and gods. The weight of destiny. Though Amphitryon suspected the truth, he raised Heracles as his own. But Zeus revealed the boy's true lineage in a dream, and warned that Hera would never stop hating the son of her rival. So Heracles grew with the burden of fate upon his shoulders, unaware of the 12 labors the gods would one day demand, or the madness that would strike him down and raise him again. But for now, he was just a boy, with fists of thunder and a heart yet to be tested. Chapter 17. Madness and Prophecy. The boy Heracles grew into a towering man, his limbs carved from strength itself, his eyes flashing like lightning beneath dark curls. The people of Greece hailed him as a demigod among mortals, a second Perseus, but his path would diverge into tragedy and legend. Marriage to Megara. In the city of Thebes, Heracles performed many noble deeds, defeating invaders, slaying beasts, and offering tribute to the gods. In reward, he was given the hand of Megara, daughter of King Creon, a woman of beauty and kindness, who bore Heracles 3 strong sons. For a time, Heracles tasted peace. His heart, long a furnace of fire and fury, softened beneath the warmth of a family. But Hera had not forgotten. Madness unleashed. On a quiet evening, as Heracles offered prayers to the gods, Hera descended, cloaked in unseen rage. She whispered poison into his mind, twisting his vision with madness. He saw monsters where his children stood, enemies in Megara's eyes. He drew his sword, howling like a wounded lion. And in that cursed moment, Heracles slew his own family. The blood of his son soaked the temple floor. Megara's cry echoed like a siren's wail through Thebes. When the madness lifted, Heracles dropped his blade and screamed, not in victory, but in grief beyond mortal words. The Oracle of Delphi. Heracles fled Thebes in shame, covered in ash and sorrow, until he came to the Oracle of Delphi, seeking redemption. The Pythia, speaking in Apollo's voice, proclaimed, "You must serve King Eurystheus of Mycenae. 12 labors shall you perform. Only through toil shall ye be cleansed." Thus began the redemption of Heracles, not through war or conquest, but through penance, shaped by impossible tasks. Meeting Eurystheus. Heracles journeyed to Tiryns, where Eurystheus, a cowardly king installed by Hera's will, sat trembling behind gilded walls. The sight of Heracles, broad as a tree and fierce as fire, terrified the king. Yet he commanded Heracles as the gods decreed, speaking behind a bronze shield. "Perform the labors I name, and your sins will be washed by their sweat." Heracles bowed, not to Eurystheus, but to fate. A hero reforged. Heracles shed the garments of a prince and clothed himself in the resolve of the condemned. He made no excuses, begged no forgiveness. His road would be paved in blood, sweat, and redemption. He would face beasts, enter underworlds, and challenge the heavens themselves. And with each labor, the name Heracles would rise, until even the gods dared speak it with reverence. But in this chapter, he was merely a man brought low, a sinner seeking to become a legend. Chapter 18. The Nemean Lion. The first labor given to Heracles by the cowardly King Eurystheus was cruel in its simplicity. Slay the Nemean lion, a beast of legend that terrorized the valley of Nemea. But this was no ordinary lion. Born of Typhon and Echidna, the lion's golden fur was impervious to blades, and its claws could rend stone. No man who had entered its lair had ever returned. Yet Heracles, burdened by guilt and driven by purpose, set forth with only his club, bow, and resolve. Into the Valley of Terror. Nemea lay silent under a blood-red sky. Villages stood abandoned, livestock slain, homes torn apart by claws the size of sickles. In the distance, a low growl rolled across the hills. Children whispered of a monster with eyes like molten gold and a roar that cracked trees in half. Heracles made no campfire. He walked barefoot into the woods, letting the stench of blood and the crunch of broken bone lead him to the beast. Arrows shattered. From the shadows, the lion emerged, a titanic mass of muscle and fur, golden as the sun and terrible as night. Heracles knocked an arrow and let it fly. It struck the lion's chest and bounced off like a stone against marble. Another and another, each shattered on its hide. The lion roared and leapt. Heracles rolled beneath its fangs, striking with his club. The wood cracked, but the lion stood unharmed. Realization dawned. No weapon could pierce this hide. Strength against monster. Heracles dropped his club and shield. He lunged at the lion bare-handed. The struggle shook the trees. Man and beast wrestled like gods. Heracles grasping the lion's throat, avoiding its fangs, enduring the shredding claws. Blood soaked the soil, but Heracles would not let go. With a final roar, Heracles twisted the lion's neck and snapped it. The valley fell silent. The beast was dead. The pelt of invulnerability. Heracles tried to skin the lion with his blade. Nothing worked. Then Athena appeared, cloaked in divine light, and whispered, "Use its own claw." Heracles obeyed, slicing through the pelt with the lion's talon. He draped the pelt over his shoulders. From that moment forward, he wore the invulnerable lion skin as armor, the beast's head as a helmet, forever marking him as a hero of legend. Eurystheus trembles. When Heracles returned, Eurystheus was so terrified at the sight of him in the lion's hide that he hid inside a bronze jar and refused to come out. He decreed that henceforth all labors were to be delivered to a servant, so he would never have to face Heracles again. And so the first of 12 labors was complete, not with blade or bow, but with the might of Heracles' hands and the unyielding force of his will. Chapter 19. The Lernaean Hydra. Fresh from his triumph over the Nemean lion, Heracles barely had time to rest when his next trial was issued. King Eurystheus, still quivering with fear, commanded, "Journey to the swamp of Lerna and slay the Hydra, a monstrous serpent with many heads. Beware, for when one head is severed, 2 more grow in its place." Thus began the second labor, far more perilous than the first. The swamp of Lerna. South of Argos lay the swamp of Lerna, a land cursed and festering, where birds no sang and the sun rarely touched the water. Villagers whispered of toxic mists and a stinking darkness that devoured men whole. There, hidden among twisted trees and black reeds, the Hydra made its lair, an ancient offspring of Typhon and Echidna, bred for ruin. Its many serpentine heads dripped venom, and its breath could kill with a single exhale. Iolaus, the companion. Heracles, knowing the task required more than brute strength, brought his trusted nephew, Iolaus. He said, "Not to fight, but to burn. When I strike a head, you must seal the wound with fire." Together they rode toward the marshes, armored in courage and strategy. A monstrous battle. The Hydra emerged with a hiss that split the mist. Its 9 heads writhed like serpents in a nest, and its central head, massive and immortal, loomed above the rest. Heracles waded into the muck and swung his sword, severing a head, but 2 more sprouted in its place, snapping with fresh fury. Again he struck, again they multiplied. Realizing the truth of the legend, he called out, "Iolaus, now!" Iolaus brought a torch to the wound, and with a scream of flame, the stumps sizzled shut. The battle turned. Fire against regeneration. With each blow from Heracles, a head fell, and with each flame from Iolaus, its regrowth was stopped. The swamp boiled with rage and venom, but the 2 men moved like a single will. Fire and steel, courage and mind. Finally, Heracles faced the central immortal head, the source of the Hydra's strength. He seized it with his bare hands, wrestled it from the twisting neck, and buried it beneath a massive boulder where it could never rise again. Death and victory. From the Hydra's corpse, Heracles collected its poisonous blood, dipping his arrows into the black ichor. Its venom would become his weapon in trials to come, deadly to gods and mortals alike. He emerged from the swamp, covered in mud and glory. Eurystheus rejects the labor. When Heracles returned, Eurystheus, still hiding behind his walls, declared, "This labor shall not count. You received help." But the people knew the truth. The songs of poets grew louder, and the legend of Heracles grew ever brighter. Chapter 20. The Hero's Legacy. With Medusa vanquished and Andromeda saved, Perseus had fulfilled feats so divine that even Olympus looked on with awe. But his journey was not yet complete. The final threads of fate awaited their weaving, into legend, into the stars. Return to Seriphos. Perseus, wings of Hermes carrying him swiftly across lands and seas, returned at last to Seriphos, the island where his mother Danae had long suffered under the leering gaze of King Polydectes. He strode into the palace, face calm, voice sharp. "Where is my mother?" Polydectes sneered. "She is mine now, and you are too late." Perseus stepped forward. "I bring a gift." He lifted the sack and pulled free the severed head of Medusa. Its eyes, still alight with ancient power, met Polydectes' his own. The king and his courtiers were turned to stone in an instant, frozen mid-laugh, mid-scorn. Seriphos at last was free. The true king. Grateful, the people hailed Perseus, but he did not seek to rule. Instead, he gave the throne to the noble Dictys, the fisherman who had once saved him and his mother from the sea. He said, "A kingdom belongs to those with kind hearts, not crowns." A twist of fate. Longing to find his roots, Perseus journeyed to Argos to meet his grandfather, King Acrisius. But fate, ever cruel and clever, intervened. A prophecy had long haunted Acrisius that his grandson would kill him. Fearing it still, he fled the city. Later, during a grand athletic festival, Perseus competed in a discus contest. As he hurled the bronze disc, a sudden gust of wind sent it flying off course. It struck an old man in the crowd, Acrisius, watching in secret. The prophecy had come true. Perseus wept, not in triumph, but in sorrow. The apotheosis. The gods, moved by his virtue and valor, summoned him to Olympus. Athena placed Medusa's head upon her aegis shield, a token of their shared victory. Zeus, proud of his son, proclaimed, "Let his tail shine forever." And so, Perseus and Andromeda were placed among the stars, their constellations watching over sailors and storytellers alike. The eternal flame of myth. Thus ended the earthly journey of Perseus, son of Zeus, slayer of monsters, liberator of queens, and bringer of balance between man and the divine. His legend would pass from bard to bard, temple to temple, carved in marble and memory. In every hero's heart since then, a flicker of Perseus endures.
Thanks for watch video. Please like, share, comment and subscribe help me. Thanks of lots.